everyone, and today we're going to talk about queer and queer history. And joining me today to discuss the ins and outs of queer culture is our Dean, Jack López. Is the first open trans person occupying a senior capacity. So, Jack, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. I am here at University of Bradford. I am an academic. I am an Associate Dean for EGI in the Faculty of Management, Law and Social Sciences, and I am special in the fact that since 2021 I'm the first open trans and queer man or person in senior leadership in the university. So I make a very conscious choice to be very out about my identity in the workplace, as an example to students and staff and other people, because there's not a lot of visibility here for us, so it's an important thing. So that's why I'm here, happy to talk about these issues today as well.
And we're grateful that you are out for all of us. So yeah, Jack, this is History Month, and so today we'll be just asking questions about LGBT history. So one of the most frequently asked questions on campus is, what is LGBTQ?
Yeah, and that's, it's interesting to start with that question as well, because we live those letters on a daily basis, and I think it's always surprising if we have a stall in the atrium or something and we've got LGBTQ plus, on our merchandise and our material, and it always surprises me when people come to ask what those letters mean, because I forget, because it's our world, isn't it? So the shorter version, for LGBT History Month is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans. People will also see LGBTQ, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer. And then we often see an IA increasingly at the end as well, and this stands for intersex and asexual, and then we have a plus category. And that's because the spectrum of sexuality and gender is so broad, and language evolves. We're just getting more and more people more comfortable in being able to express their identity with different labels and different names that they connect with, and people intersect in that as well. So it's really important to have that plus there. So the important thing is that the original LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans plus, essentially anybody and everybody that does not self-identify as a heterosexual straight person.
Yeah, I always see the plus as like a spectrum. Sexuality is a spectrum. You can't be just one thing.
It brings, when I do training on this as well, you start to realise after a bit that also straight people have a place within the LGBTQ plus rainbow, because when we look at the more nuanced categories like demisexual, asexual, aromantic, that does not mean that you can be a straight person in the sense that you're attracted to somebody of the opposite gender and still be asexual. So you can, we're welcoming to everybody. There are straight people within that umbrella, because they might be asexual or demisexual and attracted to somebody of the opposite gender.
Yeah, that's funny, because sometimes when a trans person, let's say a trans male, is in love with a woman, some people are like, oh, you're not straight, you're just technically a woman in love with another woman, so you must be a lesbian. And I don't know how else to explain to them that. That's going to lead me into my next question, which is like, do you think there's a difference between gender and sexual orientation?
Yeah, there's absolutely a difference between gender and sexual orientation. And when we talk about sexual orientation, we mean sexuality as well, don't we? So people like, sexual orientation is a very formal word for it, but gender is a lived experience. Gender is an identity, a lived experience, a sense of self. It's also a societal understanding of these weird gender roles that we have, that we've created, and gender roles bring rules that say men do this, you know, boys play football, girls play with dolls, all that weird, odd stuff is to do with it's just to do with a sense of self, of where you feel you are in terms of femininity and masculinity. Sexuality, sexual orientation overlaps with gender. So I think this is the important thing, is actually it's really difficult to put stuff into separate categories, because this stuff is all connected, because it's all about being a human being. And sexuality, you know, is, people will understand sexuality, especially when it comes to the queer community, is it's about the nuts and bolts of sex. It's a sex thing. Sexuality is beyond that. We are born with sexuality. You know, children have asexuality. Adolescents, sexuality is developing throughout the life. It's a sense of self, again, similar to gender, but it's actually about desire, pleasure, attraction, way of being, you know, that is crosses over. It crosses over with gender because of the rules that society makes up about essentially what a man or a woman should be doing. And that gets stuck in people's ideas about who they're attracted to and who they want a relationship through, which is where trans people, gender diverse and non-binary people are amazing in the fact. I'm quite biased on that score. But they blow those rules out the water, because we have a society that's really set in what we call a binary, which means a man and a woman, and there's only one thing or else, which is where you get this you're either gay or straight thing as well. And it's a false binary, and gender diverse people just blow that out of the water, because you're like, well, you know, if you're non-binary or gender fluid, you exist, you're there. You're not a figment of somebody's imagination. And if the society says men do this and women do that, well, what do we do? What do you do if you're not a man or a woman? it really allows us to question these rules that have been imposed by people in society.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned something about the society, because I was gonna ask about masculinity, because usually people use science, especially science and religion, to base their arguments that being queer is wrong or is a sin. And scientifically, I don't know if you can help me with it, there's a difference between male and female scientifically. And so is that difference the same as the social difference, or the social difference is something like, okay, you're born a man, a woman, and so you're supposed to act like this, or we are all just born male and females, and society, it's what we see that we tend to do. So the question seems weird.
No, it doesn't. And you know, and I'll answer this as somebody, as an academic, I'm an anthropologist, which means I study the human condition. And I'm a medical and social anthropologist, which means I study the human interpretation of science. I look for the human beings in science. So kind of just unpicking what you said there in terms of, well, essentially we're all born either male or female. Well, we're not. We're born humans. We're born human beings, and we have specific primary and secondary sex characteristics attached to us. But the idea that you're male or female is a societal description. We physically have bodies, and our bodies are born with different reproductive capabilities, but even that isn't a binary or a straightforward, because, you know, there are 6 different types of chromosome. There are intersex people who are various different types of biological sex. There are primary sex characteristics, as we said, and they're the secondary ones that develop in adolescence, or if you transition, you develop different secondary sex characteristics through hormone treatment. So there's actually, it's an understanding that science is not outside of society. So yes, science exists, but science is an interpretation of human beings. And human beings are socialized within a social context, within a cultural context, and that impacts on how they explain science. that impacts, in the same way that we understand that science, in what we learn in the university, was originally invented by white European men. So that means that science is done through the lens of a white European man, which means that science, as capable as it is of teaching us and letting us understand things about health and bodies and society and fixing illnesses and inventions, science is also, if it's not critically questioned properly, science is also very capable of reproducing racism, sexism, of reproducing, just wrong information about people's bodies and the way that we are. And it's not the blame of the science itself, it's the people that use the science. So it's really tricky when people talk about scientific arguments, because I would say, as an academic, and you'd know this as students as well, there's something called confirmation bias. So if you believe something, you're more likely to go and find the evidence that backs up what you believe.
Yeah.
And academics aren't objective either, we're subjective human beings. So I can find the science that backs up what I want to argue, and somebody else can find the science that backs up what they want to argue. And it's always about balance of looking at every side.
Yeah, I'm glad you said something about science is interpretation of human beings. And goes somehow with the Bible. I don't know if you can help me with this. The Bible was written like thousands of years ago, and things that happened thousands of years ago, they don't happen now.
No.
So do you think culture has played so much a vital role in how the Bible is interpreted today?
100%, yeah. And it's interpreted by different people in different ways depending on what kind of denomination. So if we're talking about the Bible, there's different types of Christian denominations.
Yeah.
It's the same with every religion. There are different interpretations of that religious text. And the difference, with Christianity, I don't have a religion, but my understanding of Christianity is that Christians believe truly that what's in the Bible is the Word of God. Whereas other religions, so for example with Islam, the Hadith and the Quran are the teachings of the Prophet. And it's so each religion has its own thing, but it's also impacted on culture, and we know that because there are queer folk, there are gender identities and different forms of sexuality, that people have at the same time as being religious people and having faith and spirituality, and there are different. It's open to interpretation, so it's difficult, and it's to do with. It's yet again coming back to that thing of confirmation bias. It's to do with people utilising the tools that they have, whether that be a religious text or whether that be scientific information, to argue the point that they want to argue.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Most people cherry pick what they want to use so that they can attack people.
But in exactly the same way that queer people who have faith-based practices as well will also cherry pick the bits of their faith that they want to help them feel comfort about who they are and the fact that they can exist. My argument with any of it is, at the bottom line, and I come at this as somebody who does have no religion whatsoever, is that my understanding of religion is it's about love and acceptance. So
we seem to be feeling that.
But then that's because the human beings get messy.
So that's always. And one final question for you. So usually when I tell somebody that I'm gay, the only thing they think about is like, how does that work? Like, they only think about sex. So I got on thinking that every straight person I speak to are pervs, like,
because they're obsessed with how you're having sex.
And what's the reason for that? Why do people automatically just think about sex when you tell them your sexuality?
I would say historically, seeing as we're in LGBT History Month, it's the historical demonisation of people who are outside of what we call a heteronormative, heterosexual, straight relationship. And this comes back to, it does connect, it's not only religion, but this somehow connects back to religion as well, because a lot of the arguments that are made by people that hide behind religion when they're actually just being homophobic, it's got nothing to do with their religion, will be because there are explanations within their different religious texts that say it's wrong for two men, you know, for one man to penetrate another man, or it's wrong for a man to penetrate anybody, you know, in the anus. And so they get obsessed about penetration and acts. And lesbians, well, apparently they just don't exist because they don't exist in any religious text, and they can't have sex apparently, and all that kind of thing. So I think that's where the obsession with sex acts comes in, because it's not just religion. If you also look at law and the way that queer people have been legislated and to be controlled has always been about sex. It's nothing to do with anything else apart from sex and appearance, because along with laws and legislation about the age of consent and what type of sex you can or cannot have has also been about you know, there's many countries around the world that have had, and you know, the UK including up until the 1960s, had cross-dressing laws where it's, you know, it was illegal to dress as the opposite sex, which is bizarre. But this all comes back to, colonial, a mixture of colonial imperialism, white, just white-centric, patriarchal, you know, all the fancy words that we throw at it, but it's white-centric European thought that was taken around the world, and it was very much used. Also, these ideas around sex and sexual practices were also used to control nations that were colonised as well, and people basically trying to stop people from procreating. I always find it very strange because the sex practices amongst queer folks can be found in heterosexual relationships as well.
Yes.
You know,
I don't know why.
Everybody's got the same holes. Everybody does things with those holes.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, but I think it's, a short answer would be a lot of what we do as a culture and society attached to law, governance and religion obsesses over the acts of sex. So then that gets in the mindset of people, and all they want, it's like when people speak to a trans person and all they want to think about is what operations they've had.
Yeah. And
which is such a tiny part of being a trans person.
And an intrusive question as well.
It's an incredibly intrusive question.
No one goes around asking what's in your pants.
If I went to go and visit your grandma, you know, would it be acceptable for me to sit there and say, do you like oral sex?
No.
So why do we think it's okay to ask?
Yeah, I think that's the way they look at queer people as less than humans, so they can ask you whatever question and you are obligated to answer.
Because you're objectified.
Yeah, I think that's the word, you're objectified. Before you go, you mentioned clothing. I read somewhere where back in the day, men used to wear the heels.
Yeah, and that's where heels come from.
And the beard and something. But now, if I wear heels, like, people laugh at me or say, no, that's a woman thing. So people usually don't understand. That's what I'm saying. Like, and I don't know if you agree with this. Our biases is not based on actually physical evidence or something. It's how we feel. Yeah. Like how something makes us feel. Like, if I'm not comfortable, I tend to hate what I don't understand.
Yeah, it's a fear of the unknown. It's peer pressure. It's ultimately peer pressure. When we talk about peer pressure, I heard something the other day and I thought it's bang on the mark, and it was a young person that said it, because when we talk about peer pressure, we also we often think about school children, you know, and smoking and drugs, and actually no, peer pressure is everything we experience on a daily basis. We all behave in a specific way because we're pressured by whatever peers we're surrounded by. And this thing called tradition, the thing that I heard the other day that a young person had said was, tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. You know, and
oh my God, that's
all it is. You know, and the whole wearing of clothes is if you don't know your history, then you're not questioning the fact that, you know, pink used to be for boys, blue used to be for girls. Men were the first people to wear heels, makeup and wigs.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, cultures, or the clothing thing is interesting actually, because cultures all over the world and cultures that were pre-colonization as well, you know, often for climate reasons, for practicality reasons, you know, wear things that would be presumed in the West as a skirt or a dress. And a lot of that as well was also about the controlling of colonised nations in terms of demonising the ways that some people dress and some people don't dress. What I think's interesting is heels and makeup were brought in by men on a issue of glamour and masculinity, to prove masculinity, whereas when these clothing items are transferred over to women, they're actually about bodily control. Because if you wear heels, you can't run, so your movement is restricted. If you wear certain types of dresses, you can't move the same, so that's about restriction.
Oh yeah, I was watching one of these old movies where even when the women find themselves, or they wear these corsets that limits their body movement.
Yeah, so they couldn't move.
You have to act
can't
like
go
a
to
lady.
the toilet, can't do anything.
Wow.
And so the things that were invented by men as forms of masculinity and liberation, when they cross over to another gender, become forms of restriction and control.
Oh wow, I've been educated today. Thank you so much for talking to me.
You're very welcome.
Okay. You will edit that out. I was gonna say I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. So I'm Teslim Thomas, and I'm the LGBTQ officer on campus and the president of the LGBT Society. And thank you so much, Jack, for talking to me today. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Anytime. Fab.